decade or so since DNA evidence was first introduced into U.S. courtrooms, it's been used to exonerate more than 100 people previously convicted of crimes. And one of the main reasons they were wrongly convicted in the first place was bad forensic evidence. As a result, federal courts are now growing more and more skeptical of forensic evidence that can't be scientifically verified and depends solely on the interpretation of an expert. That includes the arcane field of odontology, better known as bite mark analysis. No forensic science is more controversial, and no practitioner more suspect than a former Bourbon Street bouncer named Dr. Michael West. When he's not drilling teeth or fixing bridge work in his two-chair dental practice in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, you will find Dr. Michael West in a courtroom or in his laboratory poring over dental molds and autopsy photographs. Dozens of people are behind bars and some on death row based on his interpretation of bite marks.
How does it compare with other types of forensic evidence? Fingerprinting, DNA.
If you look at bite marks, you don't walk into a woman's house and borrow a phone and accidentally bite her on the arm. You have to be in a violent contact with that individual to deposit a bite mark. In that light, bite marks are better than fingerprints because they not only show that you were present, they show you were in a violent confrontation with that individual.
He's testified in 72 cases in 9 states, almost always for the prosecution, almost always in the South, and his folksy demeanor plays well with juries. He once had a colleague bite him on the arm so he could have a patch of skin removed to study the bite mark.
The science of bite marks analysis is very accurate. The art and science of bite mark analysis depends on the clinician, the person who's rendering the opinion. Itzhak Perlman can take and play the violin and make beautiful music. He can set the violin down and I come up and pick it up. I can't make noise out of the thing.
When it comes to bite marks, though, West considers himself the maestro. He has authored dozens of scientific papers, lectured at the FBI Academy and Scotland Yard, and earned a reputation as the man who finds evidence everyone else has missed. He's found bite marks on a decomposed body submerged in a swamp, on a corpse that had been buried for more than a year. He's even used a bite mark taken out of a bologna sandwich to get a conviction.
When I had my highest confidence that this individual inflicted this bite mark, I would use the term indeed and without doubt.
That's pretty certain.
That is my top 100%. You're going to have to come up with some very hard evidence to change my opinion.
But lately, people have been coming up with hard evidence, raising doubts about some of his past opinions. Take the case of Kennedy Brewer, who's on death row in Mississippi for raping and killing his girlfriend's 3-year-old daughter. Brewer was home alone with the girl the night she disappeared. 3 days later, her body was discovered in a nearby creek. Dr. West found bite marks on the body and matched them to a mold of Kennedy Brewer's teeth.
And here in this lower photograph, we see a perfect match between the gap in the bite mark and the gap in between Mr. Brewer's teeth.
It all seemed very convincing, but bite marks apparently are all in the eye of the beholder.
I'll tell you what, I'll do the time in jail if those were bite marks.
Dr. Richard Souviron is a pioneer in the field of bite mark analysis and a co-founder of the American Board of Forensic Odontology, the professional organization for forensic dentistry. He's faced off against Dr. West twice in the courtroom and lost both times. One of them was in the Kennedy Brewer case, where he found major problems with Dr. West's testimony.
How can you have, in one case, 40-some, quote, bite marks, all left by upper teeth? I mean, it's just so outrageous that it's hard for any normal person to comprehend.
Dr. West contends that it isn't that unusual to find bite marks from upper teeth only on a body. But Dr. Souviron insists they were nothing more than insect bites.
He got a set of teeth from a suspect that the police said this is the guy that did it, and he took that model of the man's mouth and placed them on these ant bites and made it fit. Made it look good.
And the jury bought it?
Yes, sir. The jury bought it.
Why do you think?
Because he's convincing. Because he's very dynamic. Because he's very outspoken. And he's a good old boy. He talks their language. And they like that.
Dr. Souviron has a problem and facing reality. The possibilities of bugs biting in such a complex pattern as to match the intricacies of these teeth numerous times, 17, 18, 19 times on a body. The jury see right through this, and they see Dr. Souviron for what he is.
But this is not just a case of dueling experts, and Dr. Souviron may yet have the last word. Advances in DNA technology made it possible last summer to finally test trace amounts of semen recovered from Christine Jackson's body. The results indicate the little girl was raped by two men, and neither one of them was Kennedy Brewer.
I never testified that Mr. Brewer raped or sodomized anyone. I testified that Mr. Brewer bit her.
So he bit her and two other people raped and sodomized her?
That's a possibility.
Is it possible you're wrong and that Kennedy Brewer is an innocent man about to be executed for a crime that he didn't commit?
It's possible, but not probable. There's a difference.
The Mississippi Supreme Court is now trying to decide whether to retry Brewer or release him. But it's not the first time DNA evidence has impeached Dr. West's testimony, and not the first time his methods have been questioned. In one case, he discovered invisible bite marks that sent a Louisiana oysterman named Tony Kecko to prison for murdering his ex-wife. No bite marks were visible at the time of death, and the case went unsolved for more than a year, until Dr. West was called in to review the autopsy photos. Eddie Castaigne was the defense attorney.
He said, but if you let me see the body itself, if you let me exhume the body, then I'll examine it under a technique that I have discovered, and I'll see if I can find a bite mark that I cannot now see with the naked eye.
The technique Dr. West used was something called ultraviolet light. Crime scene investigators had used it for years to find latent fingerprints and other evidence undetectable to the naked eye. But no one had ever used it before to find a bite mark on a 14-month-old corpse.
Under visible light, it just appeared as a big black bruise. Under alternative light, the pattern of a bite mark appeared. We found that there was a curved pattern that matched 4 of Mr. Kecko's teeth to a perfect match on her shoulder.
The only problem was Dr. West was unable to photograph or document what he'd seen, and the bite marks, he said, faded away when the tissue sample was stored in formaldehyde.
This was the case of the disappearing bite mark. It wasn't there the day after death in the autopsy photographs, and it wasn't there on the day of exhumation until he put the light on. Then it appeared, then it disappeared 10 days later. That wasn't a bite mark. This was the case of the emperor's new clothes.
All the same arguments you're making to me now, you made in the courtroom.
Absolutely.
And the jury still didn't believe you.
That's correct.
Persuasive guy.
Very persuasive. A dangerous, dangerous witness.
Tony Kecko served 2 years of his life sentence before an appeals court threw out the bite mark testimony and released him. In the meantime, Dr. West is branched out, qualifying as an expert in a wide range of forensic specialties from blood spatter analysis to crime scene reconstruction. He not only matched this machete to wounds on the victims of a triple homicide, he used his blue light to put the alleged murder weapon into the hands of a suspect named Larry Maxwell.
We have 2 rivets sticking out and a broken rivet on the end. If you grab this knife vigorously and strike, you would feel as you grabbed, you would get pressure points in the middle and into the hand from these rivets.
Not a very comfortable murder weapon.
No. Very uncomfortable. But look at the pattern on your hand now. You have a circle here and a circle here.
Dr. West testified that he saw the same circles on Larry Maxwell's hand, not immediately after the murder, but 10 days later under blue light. Once again, he tried to photograph his findings.
Correct me if I'm wrong, the Maxwell case was thrown out because you couldn't reproduce
the picture.
Bruises.
No, sir. I couldn't. I couldn't give them the picture of the bruises in Mr. Maxwell's hand. I could reproduce the bruises on other people's hands, but the actual photograph of Mr. Maxwell's hand, I overexposed.
I'm not sure anyone can match up a butcher knife and say, indeed and without a doubt, it caused a pattern on skin. No one can say it. The most highly qualified pathologist couldn't say it.
John Holridge is a death penalty lawyer who's faced Dr. West numerous times.
Now, he's supposed to be a dentist. What does he know about butcher knives?
Well, he says he has a lot of qualifications. He's taken a lot of courses, and he's been recognized as an expert in a number of different fields.
The fact that he's been recognized is part of the problem. It doesn't establish his qualifications.
Holridge was so outraged by Dr. West's testimony in the Maxwell case, he lodged complaints with 3 forensic organizations that West was a member of. West immediately resigned from 2 of the groups rather than face investigation. The 3rd group, the American Board of Forensic Odontology, his fellow dentists, suspended him for a year, saying he had testified beyond his expertise. He's since been reinstated.
I'm sorry, but I can only judge my suspension from the board as political. Nothing else.
What's behind it?
I can only assume professional jealousy.
He says it's politics.
What politics? These were not his enemies. These were his friends. These were not criminal defense lawyers. They were bite mark experts, forensic odontologists, crime scene analysts. They all hate him? I don't believe it.
But Holridge isn't just concerned about Dr. West. He has serious doubts about the whole field of bite mark analysis.
If you look at the cases across the country involving bite mark evidence, you find repeated disagreements as to, first, whether the mark in question is a bite mark, and second, if it is a bite mark, whether it's consistent with or matches a particular defendant or not. And if you have that much disagreement, one is hard-pressed to understand why the jury should be listening to it.
While bite mark analysis has been allowed into evidence for decades, its degree of accuracy has never been scientifically validated in the laboratory.
In fact, back in 1999, 26 distinguished members of the American Board of Forensic Odontology participated in a proficiency test. It was part of an informal workshop, but the results were alarming. The top practitioners in the field were given 7 sets of dental molds to match with 4 bite marks from real cases. They were wrong 63% of the time.
Dr. West was one of the 26 people taking the test, but it was a blind study and he doesn't know how well he did. In the courtroom, though, he has testified 72 times and says only 3 of those cases have been overturned because of his testimony.
I'll take that percentage rate of error.
Even if he's right that his error rate is only, 6 or 7%, that means 6 or 7% of the time he testifies, he's wrong, and that he's putting an innocent guy in jail. I don't think those are acceptable odds.
And federal courts are beginning to agree, and not just about bite marks. Recent court decisions have limited testimony from handwriting and knife mark experts. And last month, a federal judge in Philadelphia ruled that even fingerprint analysis, which has been around for 90 years, wasn't foolproof.